Hello and welcome to US Tzu Chi 360. I'm your host, Dilbar Shatterson. Behind me now is the Unisphere here in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and this massive steel structure was presented as the centerpiece of the 1964-65 World's Fair. And according to the Landmarks Preservation Committee of New York City, it was meant to symbolize peace through understanding. The Big Apple couldn't be a more fitting location for a massive piece like this, and yet its meaning couldn't be more complementary to a place whose cultural diversity demands our understanding. And as for the peace part, today I'm going to take you on a journey through special parts of the city to understand from who and how that peace is spreading across this colorful metropolis. But first, I want to take you to a part of this park where New York's many, many cultures have gone under the microscope, taking my home, Queens, as the object of its affection. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. These are words from Emma Lazarus' poem, engraved at the foot of the Statue of Liberty. And while they may have welcomed immigrants to our shores in the early 1900s, many immigrants no longer use places like Ellis Island as the starting point of their new lives. So what does the landscape of immigration look like now? Here to help us paint that picture is Prerna Reddy, the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement here at the Queens Museum. Welcome, Prerna.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks. So I wanted to know, what would you say are perhaps the biggest changes that Queens has seen in immigration in the past 50 years or so?
Well, I think there's been a lot of change in immigration law. So after 1965, that allowed a lot of Asian immigrants to enter, where for 100 years our immigration law prevented that. In 1980, we had family reunification laws. People from a wide variety of class backgrounds were able to enter in the 80s. And in general, diversity visas as well that allowed immigrants from countries that weren't very well represented before.
So what kind of challenges do you think those changes have presented?
Well, I think, language diversity, language access is always a difficult thing, because when you're talking about new immigrants who are in neighborhoods where most of the other people in their neighborhood are also immigrants who speak their home language, it's difficult for any institution or social service provider to be able to provide everything that they offer in those languages, or to make those people feel comfortable.
So what would you say is perhaps the role of other local community organizations in helping foster these communities?
Well, I think, a lot of people come to the United States because they have a family member or someone from their own village perhaps has come, and they tell them all kinds of stories about what the opportunities are, and they provide the first rung. But, as people grow, maybe they want to start a business and they're trying to figure out how to get money, or they're feeling lonely or perhaps disconnected, or they have children now. And they want to be able to teach the culture of their homeland to their children, then these organizations, these ethnically based or ethnically specific community-based organizations, are often function both as cultural spaces, and on the other end can often serve similar functions to small business organizations or societies that help people find the assets they need.
And while this has gone way beyond Queens, what would you say makes Queens specifically different from the rest of New York or from anywhere else in the world?
First of all, it's part of New York City, so it was one of the first waves in which this kind of immigration was happening and this kind of diversity is happening. We've had more time to figure out how to address some of these problems. And then secondly, I think, to me, what's interesting is that the density of being in New York City means that, every subway stop on the 7 train, for example, that we're on, which we call the International Express, you can feel like you're in a completely different country. Not only are there a lot of immigrants, but they live in such different proximity that you get certain kind of hybridity. As a museum, that's really an interesting thing to see and develop and nurture.
Well, thank you very much, Prerna.
Sure.
And so now let's take a look and visit some of Queens' most colorful neighborhoods. We're here in Jackson Heights in northern Queens, and according to Cityscape, a journal of policy development and research, it's a place where trattorias share walls with cantinas and bodegas share a dumpster with pizza and donut shops. It is places like this in New York that make the different cultures, which you see so clearly reflected in the local businesses here, exist as neighbors in a way that geography would never have made possible. And Jackson Heights is not the only place where this kind of coexistence exists. Because actually, this way east towards Woodside is Little Manila. And what's west? Restaurants, cafes, bookstores, you name it, whose owners hail from all over Latin America. So if you want to see more, come take a ride with me. One of the few above-ground subway lines, it's on the 7 that you'll probably hear more than 110 languages on this line alone, making this ride a unique experience all on its own. So now you'll see on the map that this train starts actually in Times Square and crosses over to Queens, right through Long Island City's art scene. And where we are right now is actually really close to the home of jazz legend Louis Armstrong, which is right here in Corona, and it's got a lot more in between. But on this other end of the line is one of New York's most bustling neighborhoods, Flushing. The city of New York that calls this place the heart of Queens. But you see how the ethnic demographics change here in this area, with tons of street signs here in Mandarin, in Korean, and more. And here on Main Street is where the 2 previous Tzu Chi offices first took root. But of course, as a family of volunteers begins to grow, the building needs to do the same. So in 2005, a building was purchased over there on Northern Boulevard and has been the home of many volunteers since. So let's go check it out. One special thing to note about Northern Boulevard is that it spans 73 miles and is one of the major roads connecting the beginning of Queens all the way out to Suffolk County in Long Island. And right here is where you'll see a familiar face, the Northeast's Executive Director, George Cheng. So thanks for joining us again, George.
Thank you, Deborah.
So we all know that real estate in New York can reach the moon and the stars. So why did you decide to purchase this property here?
We choose here because it's convenient for people to access to this site. Tzu Chi Pass is walk among people, community, and society. Transportation always a big issue. That's why the location for Tzu Chi office in this big city must be a location for people they don't think about they need to drive a car to get here.
In purchasing this building, how were you able to gather the funds? Because in perhaps among other Tzu Chi chapters, for the same price that you can get this building, perhaps you can get something different.
Before we purchased this building, many of our volunteers already vowed to contribute. We spent a couple of millions. It's not too big, but it's everybody's home.
有家的感觉真的是不一样，就好像不像以前那个有点漂浮的那种感觉。
哦，在家里如果一天没有来，就是觉得很不舒服，一定要来这里。
真的有一个自己的家，真的心里过得真的很踏实。
People like to come here, and we have a chance to meet every person coming from around the world thinks New York is a tourist city.
So I want to come back to perhaps the remodeling process. You mentioned that they've contributed to every inch of this space. How did they do that?
Why people love to do that? This kind of devotion and love is really, touching me. I even experienced after midnight, I drove by and I still see our volunteer try to clean the floor and try to arrange the table and the chair, because on the next morning we're going to welcome many of Tzu Chi family from Taiwan. I believe they treated this as their home.
So with so many people coming in, not only on a daily basis, but also extra on weekends, and like you said, some travelers sometimes.
Yeah.
How do you make efficient use of this tiny space that you have here?
Every time you can see it's elbow to elbow and it's packed, but we have a schedule. Based on the schedule, it is involved many volunteers. We have to move the chair and table from first floor to third floor, and next hour you have to move down again. It is a challenge for elderly people, but we could see volunteer can help them.
So how does the New York chapter here represent Tzu Chi on a global scale?
New York is a melting pot of immigrants. The United Nations is in New York. So everything or every program we provide to the community is not only for the local, it is also represent globally Tzu Chi. So we want Tzu Chi in New York to become a showcase of Tzu Chi. On the other hand, we also want that the people in New York to have a chance understand and know the spirit of great love and Tzu Chi.
Well, good luck in your mission here.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to take us to another significant New York landmark that experienced a catastrophe beyond imagination. September 11th marked a turning point for Tzu Chi in the United States. It was the first time that Tzu Chi volunteers had responded to a major disaster, but the opportunities it presented were invaluable. Tzu Chi was the only Asian organization to provide direct assistance to those affected while being in the company of the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, and other local NGOs. The Salvation Army in particular was key in giving way for volunteers to set up a booth to distribute checks for immediate relief. It was this tragedy that connected these organizations, who have since worked together with a similar spirit to give charity in the city that never sleeps. One of the people that was very involved in 9/11 relief efforts and is also a good friend of Tzu Chi is the Salvation Army's very own Master of Disaster, John Berglund. Thank you very much for joining us, John.
You're very welcome.
Can you tell me what some of the major and specific challenges of 9/11?
9/11, one, was extremely emotional. There was a sadness to 9/11 that really permeated throughout the city. So I think in hindsight, thinking back, that's what I remember most, actually. That and the fact that I worked the graveyard shift. That was probably one of the largest challenges. And then also trying to balance out the amount of help that came in from all over the world.
So from an English-speaking perspective, I know that Tzu Chi can be a mouthful. So how did you first pronounce it?
I've always said Tzu Chi, so I think I hit it too hard. You make it sound much more easy.
What was your first impression of the volunteers when you met them?
My impression of Tzu Chi always has been organized, disciplined, efficient. And as I've gotten them to know them separate from the delivery service, I think part of what I'm hearing and experiencing is the commitment to the mission of what they do.
I know that the Salvation Army and other organizations like the Red Cross are perhaps more well-known household names. So what can be the contribution of lesser-known organizations like Tzu Chi in doing disaster relief or generally charitable efforts?
I don't think Tzu Chi is as less known as you think. I think you have both an international image, and I think you have a growing U.S. image. Also, I always appreciate the international players that come in and start to work domestically because they bring a different perspective.
What kind of contribution do you think the Salvation Army can bring to Tzu Chi, and also kind of
vice versa?
Yeah.
The Army does have a 100-year history. Our strength is real estate. Our strength is serving individuals in crisis on a daily basis. When it comes to a disaster, what we try to do is ramp those resources up. What the Salvation Army is especially good at is filling in the gaps. We have a faith-based social work mission. So when that's applied to disaster, what we try to do is keep an eye out on what are the gaps. What is it that other agencies can't do that we can possibly do? There may be gaps that you can fill, such as medical service. There may be gaps that you can fill, such as volunteers. There's always financial gaps which you can help to fill. So by building the relationship and having the constant communication, you actually help us with that ability to fill in the gaps.
Disaster is never really a positive thing, but what would you say might have been some of the few things that were good lessons?
There's always positive things that come out of disaster. Out of New York specifically, what came out of the disaster was the recovery model of getting all of the service agencies into one place. Another thing that came out of 9/11 was the Coordinated Assistance Network. Every time one of these large catastrophic events occurs, we learn something new. We find new partners. We find out what we do well, what we don't do well.
And what about through Sandy?
Through Sandy, yes. I think New York learned a lot of lessons on that. The urban environment, and New York is probably a little different than any other city in the country, so it's unique to itself, but there's still a lot of work to be done on how we work in urban environments.
In what capacity did the Salvation Army work with Tzu Chi in kind of trying to
in
aid the recovery
Sandy,
process?
I believe we did some feeding together. And the interesting thing about that is that you were very good about responding very early on. So to get agencies to respond quickly in the early stages of response.
And what is your hope to work with Tzu Chi in the future?
Our hope always is to bring together as many resources as possible, and it's ensemble playing. So if you know there's certain players that have specific expertise in different functions, whether that be feeding or sheltering or medical, you want to know all those different players and you want to bring them together as quickly as possible. So it's the coordination piece.
Well, thank you for being here with us.
You're very welcome.
And now let's go meet Peggy Sheng, a volunteer who's decided to take consistent action after 9/11. Now we're at the Chinatown Service Center, which came to life here on Howard Street after 9/11. Peggy Sheng, who's here with me now, lent a hand in daily relief efforts in the many days after the collapse of the buildings. And so, Peggy, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, you are one of the deputy directors here at the Service Center.
Yes, I am.
But how did you become so devoted to Tzu Chi?
I met Tzu Chi in 1997 through my sister. I was a haphazard volunteer. But it is because of post-September 11 event that made me devote my time to Tzu Chi.
So is there a particular memory or particular story that you have from Pier 94 that impressed you?
Yes, I remember a Colombian family. They were desperate, wanted to come to the United States to look for their loved one who were presumably missing at the World Trade Center. And they didn't have the funding to pay for visa. So Tzu Chi Foundation was just in time. They paid the visa fee for this family to come.
So at Pier 94, about how much help was given out to these people?
We were giving every victim's families $1,000. We gave out total around $2.78 million.
And what was the biggest motivating factor for getting this service center started?
Aside from the World Trade Center, this is the next most severely affected area. So a lot of people were displaced. A lot of workers were out of job. So at that time, Tzu Chi Foundation set up temporary relief center. After that, we realized that there are a lot of people around here that needs our help. So with the blessing of the headquarters and our master, we're able to establish a Tzu Chi Foundation here.
And now, over 10 years later, what would you say is the crown jewel of the service center?
The Service Center still provide continued care for residents in the Lower East Side, especially those who are under the poverty guideline, and also aging population. We have now served around 120 to 150 elderlies in our center. We provide hot meals on both Saturday and Sunday.
While you do have that success, what would you say are some of the real challenges that still exist for Tzu Chi in this area?
In this area, the challenge remains to be having enough of in-language volunteers to work with Tzu Chi Foundation. That's why we put a lot of emphasis on our younger generation. We want to kind of cultivate these young seeds so that they could become our ambassador toward this community.
Well, I do know of another volunteer who's also from the Northeast region who has the same hopes. So
Great.
Let's hop over to Flushing. I'm joined by Sansan Cheng, a volunteer with the New York chapter office since 2001. So Sansan, through 9/11 and through Sandy, what would you say are some of the few positives that have come out of these moments of chaos?
The most of the volunteers thought, here's their home. They create a lot of activity and event that then evoke their compassion to help the people. The event also create a resource of like a manpower.
So what has this manpower been focused on doing over the years since the chapter started in the 90s?
Because we have to continue all this event to that all volunteer to do it, works to do. So we visit the senior center, like we have the scholarship home visiting, and we create financial assistance. In the past 2 years, and we also create the Happy Campers.
What also have the volunteers accomplished with post-Sandy charity care?
The Sandy is very challenging project to us because they have a language barrier. We need a local volunteer to join us, which they can speak Spanish and Urdu.
Why is it important for Tzu Chi to be a part of this community?
Okay, because New York City is the biggest city in the world. The multicultural people living here, and we have a multicultural volunteer to join us, and we can continue to do more events.
And what about, for example, for people who are undocumented?
They don't have beneficiaries in this community, so that's why our Tzu Chi, the goal is which is nobody help and we do help.
Is there a particular message that you want to give to inspire and encourage more volunteers to join the Tzu Chi efforts here in New York?
Our new volunteers, which they have from different fields, they have their professional. We really have to focus what they can do, what they can help. If any disaster happen, it's not just we wish have a disaster happen, but we have a continuity, which is the activity that then do it.
Thank you very much, Sansan Sugu, and good luck in getting all the help you need this year.
Thank you.
And so, in the nick of time, let's get ready to welcome the new lunar year. I'm here now at IS 237 in Queens, where the Year of the Snake has met its end. Our thanks to the guests of today's episode who have helped us understand the melting pot that Tzu Chi has joined here in New York. And thanks to you for joining us today on our journey through Manhattan and Queens, our windows to the rest of the Northeast region. And as we trot toward the Year of the Horse, a year that represents confidence, warm-heartedness, and decisive action, let's hope that it will bring out those admirable qualities in all of Tzu Chi's volunteers in New England and beyond. And next time you'll see us soon in our neighbor's place across the Hudson in New Jersey. But for now, I'm here from New York. I'm Dilbar Shatterson, and I'll see you soon.